All right. Meanwhile, let's bring in CNN senior political analyst John Avlon.
He's with me on this.
I was wondering the exact same thing.
And two CNN legal analysts, Shan Wu, a former lawyer for Rick Gates and a former federal prosecutor, and Kerry Cordero, former counsel to the U.S. Assistant Attorney General for National Security. Great to have all of you and your minds with us today because we're going to need them. So, Shan, the president and his supporters and his surrogates are using a very interesting tactic. They're saying there was no crime. There's no crime. This is not illegal, which is very interesting for Michael Cohen to possibly be going to prison for a non-crime, okay? And so what I think they're saying is that there is no campaign finance law, or people are not usually prosecuted for it, or if there is a campaign finance law, the money had to come from a campaign. Can you explain to us what the law is as related to the president that Michael Cohen broke?
Actually, Alison, you did a very good job of making arguments in the alternative there, much clearer than Giuliani has. So the problem legally for the president is that Cohen in court admitted to and pled guilty to a textbook case of seeking to influence the election. And he used that word specifically, and that's what the problem is. It is a potential deflection to try to get everyone to pay attention to the source of the funds. That could be an issue, but that's not the open and shut case.
So they don't have to come from a
made.
campaign. To be clear, they don't have to come directly from Trump for president. They can come from, say, the Trump organization and still be the same crime.
Right. You could have a separate problem with using campaign funds for an improper purpose, and that still may be operative here. But specifically, we've been hearing about the influence, and in some ways, the influence would have been a harder case to prove because influence requires the intent to do that, but Cohen seems very crystal clear on that point. And then I guess the last issue that the president's trying to raise is it has nothing to do with the campaign at all. Maybe he hasn't articulated this well, but that it's a personal issue that he was trying to take care of, and that might well be his motivation, but there his problem is going to be the timing that they chose to do that in. And in fact, I think even earlier in that tape we've all heard, he talks about being aware of a timing thing for a different issue. I think it was for a divorce document, but he seems very aware of the timing of the election.
He also is very aware of the money. In that tape conversation that we heard between Michael Cohen and the president, in the part we didn't play, he says, so what do you have to pay for this, $150,000? The president in September discussing how much to pay for silencing a woman before the election, and then last night on Fox News, he says he didn't know about it till later on. Those two things are impossible to square. And Kerry, as you go into this, the case here, and Ali, I think you correctly laid it out, perfectly laid it out, in fact, what the president and his allies are trying to say here. They're ignoring the evidence that the federal government, that the Justice Department says it has. It's not just Michael Cohen. This federal prosecutor stood up in court and said they have records obtained in the searches of Michael Cohen's office. They say they have text messages sent over encrypted apps, phone records produced via subpoena, the witness testimony, including witnesses involved in the transactions in questions who communicated with the defendant. And this morning, I have my legal documents.
I can see that. You're really making the case.
The Wall Street Journal reports that adding to the pressure, David Pecker, the chairman of American Media Inc., which publishes the National Enquirer, provided prosecutors with details about payments Cohen arranged with the women who alleged sexual encounters with President Trump, including, and here's the alarm bell, Mr. Trump's knowledge of the deals. Kerry, that seems to be a fair amount of evidence there.
Right. So the plea agreement that was reached with Michael Cohen, the prosecutors would not have accepted his plea if they hadn't verified the information that was in it. So they didn't, the government did not just take Michael Cohen's word that he had committed this act, committed this violation, and that he had done so in coordination and at the direction of, quote, individual one, who we know is now the president, then candidate, Donald Trump. And that's in the documents, and that was in the statement that Michael Cohen made in court. So they have, as you just described, other evidence that would have corroborated the information that Michael Cohen gave them, which means that the president's team, to the extent that they try to simply discredit Michael Cohen, isn't really going to be persuasive because there are text messages or other types of evidence that were gathered, and perhaps the testimony that they have obtained or interviews they've obtained of other witnesses who may be knowledgeable about what transpired.
This is the bombshell that you just read, John. I mean, John, this David Pecker, it says here, he provided prosecutors with details about the payments that Mr. Cohen arranged with the women who alleged sexual encounters with President Trump, including Mr. Trump's knowledge of the deals. I don't think Mr. Trump got his $150,000 worth out of this source. That was to be quiet, David Pecker. What are you doing telling prosecutors about this?
This is the problem when prosecutors get involved. All your subterranean plans tend to come out. And this is where the Trump team's running into the wall of reality. To date, the president's core strategy of deny, deflect, distract, divide has worked very well, at least with his base. But it doesn't work when you come up against the legal system. And so they've got to confront uncomfortable facts. So you see a demoralized press secretary. So you see a president trying to pretend that campaign finance laws don't apply. And you see testimony being given by friends and allies that don't stick with the given narrative because they're being forced to tell the truth under oath. These are real problems that he can't spin his way out of.
It's a Pecker problem.
It's a Pecker problem, if you will.
It is a big Pecker problem.
Can I play you what the president said last night about Michael Cohen? Again, Michael Cohen is someone who has been very close to the president for a long time. And again, if you've covered Donald Trump for a while, he was always there. But this is what the president said about Michael Cohen last night.
Michael Cohen, tell me about your relationship with him.
Well, he was a lawyer for me for one of many. You know, they always say the lawyer, and then they like to add the fixer. Well, I don't know if he was a fixer. I don't know where that term came from, but he's been a lawyer for me, didn't do big deals, did small deals, not somebody that was with me that much. You know, they make it sound like I didn't live without him. I understood Michael Cohen very well. What turned out he wasn't a very good lawyer, frankly. But he was somebody that was probably with me for about 10 years, and I would see him sometimes.
Just a guy, John.
Barely
Just a guy.
knew the guy. Barely knew the guy. And what's fascinating is, of course, you've got footage from Air Force One where he says, refer to my lawyer, my attorney, Michael. And not that long ago, a few months ago, the administration didn't even know Paul Manafort, right? I mean, from the White House podium, barely worked for him for a hot second, no real involvement in our campaign.
There's some footage of Michael Cohen not near Donald Trump.
Yeah, exactly.
Right
One
there.
of many footage, that dozens, hundreds of tapes that exist where he's not near Donald Trump. But now he's throwing his consigliere under the bus, which strains credulity, and he's all of a sudden re-embracing Paul Manafort. And to me, one of the most chilling things that came out of yesterday is the President of the United States praising a convicted felon who was chairman of his campaign for not breaking by giving information to prosecutors.
Yeah. That language is really interesting, for not breaking.
Not breaking.
It wasn't for telling the truth, it was for not breaking.
Right, that is language out of a Scorsese film, not The Oval Office.
Yeah, you're not talking about Scorsese films like, you know.
The King of Comedy.
No, not that one. You're talking about the mob movies. All right, the Paul Manafort reference there provides us a perfect segue to our next segment.